Moving on to track 7, Debutante Ball, which is an interesting name. I don't know what that might mean in relation to Suisse. Also, I haven't had a drink for a while, not since, well, actually the 2 drinks so far have all been for Wee Wee Woo. It's alright though. Let's go. Thank God for a soft song. Hopefully. She sounds so good in this. Like I'm hearing her for the first time. Oh, yes! What? Ooh. Oh, I love that bass part. Oh, that just hit the right spot. Ooh, it's like a 7th. That's a 7th that she holds there. Oh my god, I'm drinking that. Big swing for that chorus. Even just those soft touch piano chords. This is my favorite song by far. I will explain later. I just want to vibe. Ooh. The variation in that piano accompaniment is sublime. It's just played so lightly. Oh, there are some really crunchy piano chords on this. Also, these very subtle variations that I'm appreciating a lot. Those rapid piano octaves, beautiful. Oh my god. I love Sui singing that melodic line. It's so heartfelt. I feel like this is the first time I've felt like she's singing this really from the heart. It's odd. Hey, nice. Ah, yep, we needed this breakdown part. Oh my god, okay. Yep. I want to drink again. Oh my god, these chord progressions. I just want to eat them up. Oh, that was, she went high up there. Da, 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 da. When she holds those bloody seventh intervals, it's so butt clenching. Also, that synth in the background that's going like da 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 da. And then we're back to the start. I do love these broken octaves. And that very, very loose snare. Everything just works so well together. It's ending with a little drummer boy. This is the best song on this album so far by a long, 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 long shot. I'm gonna give this whole song an honorary drink for just getting under my skin like that. It was crazy. Okay, I can already hear potential criticisms of this song in my head. Like, I'm looking at the time, it's the only song that's past the 5-minute mark. Actually, the only song that is past the 4-minute mark, runs a total of 5 minutes and 48 seconds. For me, it was way too short. I would have liked it to have gone on for another 20 minutes. I feel like the length of this song was its strength. There were some really interesting variations from section to section. I'm all about variation, you know, just give us something different each section so that we feel the emotional progression. How they did the progression was done in a subtle way. They didn't use cheap gimmicks like sudden key changes that weren't really necessary. They didn't do the True Girl Show thing where they tried to stash in as many genres as they could. Here it was just sophisticated, I can't even speak now, sophisticated, subtle progression, just tweaking a little piano bit here, adding another synth there, playing the piano octaves in a different kind of way. It just felt so natural, and I was fully immersed in the atmosphere that Debutante Ball set up. Variations is something that we definitely should go into in the analysis. They were subtle enough, but present enough that my ears were just 100% engaged the entire song. What really makes the song stick its landing are those beautiful, beautiful chord progressions and the melody that they built on top of them. Like, really deserved the full-on scrunched up face. For the first time, as I said, on this album, I also heard Suisei sing something genuine and emotional. Not that the other songs, you know, don't have deeper messages. I'm sure they all do. I just feel like this song is the only song so far that has been composed in such a way as to allow Sui to emote to a much fuller extent. There's another potential criticism that I will address, which is probably going to be about the mixing. Sui's vocals do get somewhat crowded out by the bass and the percussion and the guitars and everything else that's going on. I feel, though, that there might be a general criticism that could be leveled at most tracks that we've listened to so far. That's a mystery that I don't know if there's a reason for that. It's just the entire album, the production quality hasn't been the best. But putting that aside, I did not mind it all that much here. Do I wish Suisei's vocals came through much more clearly? Of course, because she sings Debutante Ball with such passion, and it has such a great melody line that works so well with the underlying chords. But I do enjoy the musicality in the instrumentals that were here. You know, I didn't mind that they were boosted a tad too much, especially like that really cool, really juicy, scrumptious bass line. Watching back on that reaction, God, I made it so bloody obvious that Debutante Ball was my favorite track on Spectre by a mile. And to be honest, not much has changed since the year and a half that I recorded that. In this analysis, I really want to justify why I still think that way. Like, why I think
DB rises to a level of musicality that I really didn't expect on this album. The lion's share of why DB is so freaking good is because it masterfully uses consonance and dissonance to take us, the listeners, through a very deliberate, very emotional and classy journey where the tension in the music rises and falls in such a way as to lead us to the ultimate eargasm. So I covered those two key concepts, consonance and dissonance, back in my wee wee woo analysis, but focused more on the physics and like the maths around sound frequencies and how they work. With DB, I do want to come at it from a slightly different angle, and that is the core role that consonance and dissonance play in shaping musical narratives and our emotional experience as we listen to that music. Think about any piece of music as a story. Without that conflict and that rising action that leads to a climax, the story may be easy to follow, but it would lack emotional impact. Same with music. You know, in music, dissonance is like the conflict in a story. It creates these moments of unease, but also anticipation. Consonance, on the other hand, is like the resolution at the end of a story that provides that sense of closure. So it's the interplay between consonance and dissonance, that tension and that release, that is what gives music its emotional depth and its emotional impact. How is musical dissonance created? It's often explained in a couple of different ways, and the most simplest one is that it's just what happens when you play a bunch of harsh, clashing notes. But, you know, dissonance is much, much more than just sounds that clash and sound edgy. Dissonance is also about playing a combination of notes that create harmonic tension, that yearn for resolution or yearn to go somewhere different. The simplest example of this is the major seventh interval. It is just one semitone short of an octave, you know, this very pure harmony of two essentially same notes. When you hear that major seventh being hit, it sounds dissonant because our ears just naturally anticipate the resolution that we'll get when eventually that seventh moves up to the octave. So composers use these dissonant intervals and chords, which is just a bunch of intervals stacked on top of each other like this, to create tension and release. And in doing so, they're able to shape the emotional contour of a piece. As a side note, it is important to remember that what is considered consonant or dissonant is to some extent subjective. So what was historically considered dissonant can change over time, with intervals once thought really tense and jarring becoming more accepted in later musical periods. For instance, that major seventh interval that we looked at was used very sparingly in early classical music because of its melodic dissonance, whereas now it's just common as pie. Speaking of emotional contours, simpler music often follows a structure like Freytag's pyramid, where you'll have one or only a very few instances of tension and release. And these typically conclude with this pure consonant harmony, providing a very certain and a clear sense of closure at the end. More sophisticated pieces, however, look much more like the Fichtean curve. Dissonances resolve into consonances that themselves subtly introduce new dissonant elements. And so that creates a continuous cycle of tension and partial resolution, and then more tension, which propels the music forward and intensifies its overall emotional impact. This cyclical approach to dissonance is known as harmonic progression, where one chord progressively leads to another, and then another, and then another, eventually building a series of dissonant harmonies that demand resolution. And as listeners, we are drawn along this harmonic journey. Our ears, they anticipate and they savor each resolution that we do get, while at the same time encounter new tensions. And I would argue that DB falls into this camp of more complex, harmonically progressive songs. The more prolonged the tension, the more satisfying the eventual return to consonance. And it's this ebb and flow of musical tension that allows the composer to guide us through whatever complex emotional narrative they want to make us feel. Essentially, we are being emotionally manipulated through sound, and it's actually really awesome. And that is really all the music theory that you need to understand why I think DB is the most sophisticated and satisfying track of all on Spectre, and really the only track except maybe Template that really allows Suisei to sing with real emotional depth and color. I'm very conscious that what we've talked about up until this point may sound very airy-fairy to some of you. So what we're going to do now is we'll go through Debutante Ball in slow motion, chord by chord, so that we can hear how dissonance and harmonic progression are used to trigger these emotional and these pleasure centers of our brains. Now, to help visualize the level of dissonance or tension in any given chord or string of chords, I'm going to use a spice meter. Chords with mild dissonance are like your local friendly green peppers, and it goes all the way up to these red hot chords made up of super funky intervals. Now, this is just a rough guide. Things like chord voicings and the surrounding context of the music can increase or decrease the dissonance or tension of any chord, but I'll point those things out as we go through the song. So the intro of DB, before we even get to the vocals, the song starts with a really chill setup and these ever so slightly staggered piano octaves. Notice that these octaves aren't actually synced, so instead of they're just slightly off, which is actually really cool. It seems like such a trivial thing to point out, but I did want to highlight it because it is one of many instrumental choices throughout the song that accumulatively add texture to the song. It's not really in your face, but it doesn't really have to be, and I think in fact works better when it's not. The other thing about this intro is that it's already setting up how DB will use dissonance to create its tension. In this intro, the keyboard is hitting some of these adjacent notes in the key of B flat major, which is the key the song is in, just hitting these very clashy major second intervals. This first chord that we hit as soon as verse 1 starts, it's C minor add 9, which is really just a regular C minor chord with an added 9 at the top. Adding a note that's 9 tones above the root of the chord is sort of like the equivalent of adding a dash of mild hot sauce to your fries. This slightly spicy F6-9 chord sounds both somewhat resolved, which gives it sort of that major tone because it doesn't include the clashiest of intervals, like a 7th. Instead, it has the 6 and the 9, which, although not as clashy as the 7th, also gives it a slightly unresolved and slightly mild spice sort of feel because the 6 wants to resolve down to the 5, while the 9 wants to resolve downwards to the 8 or the octave. And then we'll kind of skip over the next couple of chords. It's basically a couple more slightly mildly dissonant chords to set the scene before we cycle back to the C minor add 9 again. The second half of this verse is where we're hit with this chord. That G flat major 7 sharp 11. It's like sort of like the first shot in the arm, you know? It adds more color. One, by being the first chord to snap us out of that B flat major home key, since it has some notes that don't really belong to that key. It essentially has 2 7th intervals in there. Here and here, and also the extra clashiness of that tritone. Which makes it full of tension and just a great jumping off point to lead us into that pre-chorus. The chord that that verse ends on, that F7 sus4, it is a peg down from the previous tension of the sharp 11 chord, But even then, it's designed to make us want to keep moving forward, because sus chords, as the name suggests, specifically introduces this sense of being suspended in the air. Okay, so we've reached the pre-chorus, the dynamics have increased, the drums are coming in for real now, and we've got just generally thicker instrumentals, which kind of levels up the tension for the next set of chords. What's cool about the chord that the pre-chorus starts on is that it is in its home key of B flat major. Kind of. Essentially, it's the home B flat major 1 chord, but stacked on top of its middle note, the D. So if you put the middle note down at the bottom here. And what that does is provide some sense of relief from the tension that's built up in the verse. But it also leaves the door open to going somewhere else interesting. And sure enough, that D in the base of that chord moves very smoothly up 1 semitone to make this E flat 7 sus 4 chord, which introduces yet another note, the A flat or the flatted 7th, that does not belong to the home key of B flat major. Back to that slash chord again. From here, it ups the tension again and even more than it's ever been up to this point, by using the F minor 7 as just a stepping stone to the super clashy G augmented chord. Augmented chords produce anxiety, musical anxiety, which is a good thing because of how the augmented, or that raised 5th, destabilizes the root. Augmented chords are absolute butt clenchers that just beg for resolution, which is why it feels good when that augmented chord only lasts for a brief moment before sliding down to the familiar and relatively less dissonant C minor at 9. But the relief does not last long again, because the end of that pre-chorus really ramps up that dissonance by throwing in a bunch of nasty clashy chords. I don't even know what it was. Something like an F sharp, Aug add 9, like a D7 with a flatted 6. So clashy in a weird good way that again sets us up for when all hell breaks loose in the chorus. I was just too lazy to write down everything that's going on in the chorus, because everything goes off in the chorus. The bass line goes off, the piano goes off, the electric keyboard starts riffing at this higher register in the background. But if you had to focus on one thing that elevates everything dissonant that's going on to an orgasmic level of dissonance, is the fact that Suisse is holding one of the most dissonant notes of the B flat major, the major 7th, or the A in this case. She's just belting that A for like 4.5 beats, which doesn't sound like much, but in dB time it feels like a freaking long time, because in addition to that natural clash of the 7th that we're hearing, underneath is this mass of moving chords. So like there's one part, she's holding that A, right? Just all these gooey, yummy, dissonant chords that are constantly moving and clashing beautifully with that sustained A. Additionally, in that melody, she sits on that 7th and then just kind of dances her around the home key, and then finally gives us relief by actually hitting that home note, like that B flat, for like a second or two, but then she just continues to dance around it. She never really sits on it that long, which again heightens the tension and by extension the emotion in the music. And that's why throughout the entire chorus you get this very tense, unstable feeling that's also satisfying, but that's also really tense. One of my favorite dissonant highlights in the chorus is this part here, where for a second you get this lovely clash of the G minor, G major 9 chords. It's that perfect chord for creating a bittersweet feeling with a mix of that minor and major. It's almost like, you know, if you're singing about a love that you had that was great, but now you've lost it. Or basically anything that gives you just really mixed, complicated feelings. And then of course at the end of the chorus, it leads to that huge payoff. You know, we've been fed all of this delicious dissonance and tension, and our butts are clenched real tight, and then it finally comes home to that B flat major home chord. To bring this all home, I made a piano track that tries to encompass most of the dissonance in DB in the verse and the chorus. So the y-axis is the level of tension or dissonance in the music. And then of course we have the color-coded spice levels. And hopefully this will allow you to see and to feel just how well constructed and sequenced the harmonic progressions are in DB. I do apologize for some of the chunkiness in the chords. It turns out that it's kind of hard to fit like 5 different parts into the one instrument, but it should hopefully at least get the point across. And that's why DB is so good. If we were to drill down into each and every second and figure out all the different types of dissonance that are occurring, I think we'd just be here forever. But hopefully that gave you a broad understanding of the super solid musicality that drives DB. It's the use of dissonance, that constant push and pull, structuring the music so that the dissonance builds and recedes and then builds again and then recedes some more until it explodes and then resolves and then builds itself back up again. That is why this song stands out on the album as being the most emotionally progressive, you know, beyond the fact that it is one of the few slow songs on Spectre, and therefore just much more personal. Another important thing I wanted to highlight is the use of variation in DB, which meant that every single section added something fresh in each of the instrumental parts. DB it's a decently long song, you know, and with long songs come the risk of becoming boring or the reward of being musically engaging and experimental if you use variations. So the thing that makes a difference is how tasteful that variation is. And like I said, if DB had been an extra 20 minutes long, I would have still eaten every minute of it up if they'd kept up the level of variation that they had. Again, not in-your-face variations, but these subtle instrumental ones that they built into the accompaniment. For example, here at the end of the first chorus, they include these chords, extra chords here, and then these kind of like waterfall sixths down the piano. It's just subtle. Verse 2 is where you get these very sparkly runs in the keyboard, kind of like star sparkles, I don't know. And also those additional chill octaves in the piano. Da, da, da. bass is doing something different to what it was in verse 1. Again, just a different texture to differentiate verse 2 from verse 1, while still retaining a very strong sense of familiarity. Like, it's not going off into the bushes to completely wreck a new hole into a new genre of music. It's just staying within the world that it's built, but doing the same thing in a very different way. I could just go on and on and on. Like, this second pre-chorus, the way it differentiates itself from the first one is just by having so much more movement in all of the instrumental parts. And it's not just a very heavily syncopated bass, but that piano going like so much more heavily rhythmic than in the previous section. Obviously, I loved this breakdown in the bridge, but what I would rank as my favorite chordal moment ever in DB is the start of the third and the final chorus, which comes right after this. And it's one of the quietest, most contemplative points in the song. But even in that contemplation, the chords don't stop being very dissonant and they don't stop saying things. In fact, the chord that Sui lands on just before her big sweeping finale is this one. That is so cool. Okay, so this is the E minor 9 chord, and yes, it's a bittersweet chord, but also amazingly, if you split that chord up into its separate notes, you get this. And doesn't that sound familiar? So it's essentially a mashed together echo of the very first line that Suisei sings in Debutante Ball, but she sings this. Which is why I said this is an echo of that other line. Because Suisei starts that phrase on the G, whereas this mashed up chord starts on the E. To sum up, in the most contemplative moment of the song, they ended on a chord that recalls the beginning of that song, but in a distorted and a very compressed, but still somewhat recognizable way. Sort of how when we recall our childhood or something that happened a long time ago that changed us fundamentally, but that also we can barely remember and that makes us feel quite distant from the person we once used to be. Or maybe in the way that, just bringing it back to Suisei, it's her almost recalling her beginnings as a VTuber and how everything she's been through, whether good or bad, has really changed her as a person. The idea that DB is a bittersweet song that recalls all of the challenges and the struggles that have changed her makes a lot of sense when we tie in the other aspects of music theory that we covered before. When you add a musical variation to a song that is structured like a Fichtean curve, in other words, when the conflicts and the tensions are new in some sense, but they always return to a point of familiarity, that curve becomes more like a circle and you end up with a narrative structure that resembles the hero's journey, which is another really well-known template for stories. Basically, the hero goes on a journey, they encounter difficulties, and then they come out the other end as a changed person. They're the same person, but they're different. Thematically, I think it fits the idea of Suisei imagining herself as a debutante. You know, the trope with debutantes is that they step out into society from almost like a place of innocence, and then they encounter the world's complexities and they make mistakes and they encounter some really dark times and difficulties. They lose that innocence, but they gain more knowledge and experience and wisdom. And then there's this period of growth and reflection. And then finally, they learn to accept themselves and the person they've become. So same person, just different. Kind of like how Debutante Ball as a song repeats the same musical ideas, but in very different ways and in a way that harmonically follows that progression of a full-blown hero's journey. Thank you guys for indulging my Debutante Ball rant. I really enjoyed digging deep into this song, and final word, I honestly think all 5 minutes and 48 seconds of the song were not wasted a bit. I think they maximized and just squeezed out every bit of musical juiciness they could from
just every aspect of the song. Remember, I do have a Ko-fi page where you can support more of this kind of content and also make some song recommendations. I do look forward to finishing off Spectre in the next couple of weeks, but until then, I hope life treats you well.